Okay, nice. Thank you so much, John, for coming. I really appreciate you coming out because I was like, well, it was out of nowhere, like, well, why don't you come and and we really want to try this year to start like doing some international sessions with speakers from all over the world. And so I'm really looking forward to all you have because I'm really a fan of your blog and the dedication that you have and explaining all the aspects regarding data ops and Power BI and how to bring all these things together. And I think that the topic for today is very interesting.
Well, wonderful. Well, I appreciate the invite, and hopefully everyone learned something today, and either you take away some data ops principles on saving time, or you learn a little bit more about Azure OpenAI. So, Bernard, if it's all right, could I get started?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so today's presentation is on commenting PowerQuery with Azure OpenAI. The slides today that I have, I'll have a bit.ly link on here so you can actually download these, including some of the content that I'm showing you today as well, if you want to work on it in your own time. All right, so the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenge of working with comments and understanding PowerQuery, especially if you're inheriting a Power BI data set or semantic model for the first time and really trying to get to know what each step is taking. And then talk about some best practices with commenting and how Azure OpenAI can help you do that in terms of commenting and may take some of the workload off of your team. And I'll have a demo for it, including I have all the templates I showed you today are on GitHub that you can download. One caveat to that is Azure OpenAI is something that you'll have to run yourself, and you're going to need a license for that or portal access to do that. But all the Power BI templates, the data flows, the code that I share today will be free to use under MIT license. And then finally, this is one of my first kind of handful of Azure OpenAI projects, and I wanted to share some lessons learned with you all regarding how to get into the field of prompt engineering and really understand how you could take advantage of the ChatGPT or Azure OpenAI large language models and how to implement them in your own environment. All right, so a little about me. I'm John Kerski. I've been working in the Microsoft BI stack for a little over 11 years. I started out as a SharePoint developer and then got into something called Power Pivot for SharePoint. And then Power BI came out and I dove head into it. And then over the last several years, I've been working with Azure DevOps, practicing a methodology called data ops to implement more efficient processes when you're building your data analytics projects. So today, I'm not going to give you a tutorial all on data ops, but just know that one of the reasons I'm talking about using OpenAI to use and help you do your daily work is to try to reduce the time that you have to run manual tasks and deliver things to customers a lot quicker. My contact information is up on the screen. You see I'm on X or Twitter, LinkedIn, and then I'll have the link to my blog. There's a QR code if you want to go and download these slides. All the hyperlinks are also accessible on that link, and that's on GitHub as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the challenge. If I was to look at a PowerQuery steps, hopefully this is familiar to you all if you've been working in Power BI long enough, where as you add steps to transform the data that you've been ingesting, you have these little names here. And a lot of the times the challenge you have with this is maybe you've done a lot of work and then you come back to it. And in order to understand what's happening, you're kind of scouring the steps here and you're going to hunt and click on, all right, well, what's that replaced value? What was that added custom column? What table did I merge here? And this can take up a lot of time. Am I talking on mute? Did it mute myself? Oh, okay. All right, somebody must have muted me accidentally. So
We can hear you.
okay. So the challenge we have with working with the applied steps in PowerQuery is really understanding what each step is doing, especially if you've inherited that semantic model. A lot of the time, you'll be clicking into these steps. And if you're working with very large data sets, sometimes it's going to take a little while for that step to actually process and see what's happening. So in order to understand how you're merging a column, that can take time. It also takes time to understand what column was removed. Maybe you didn't see it in the model and you're trying to figure out where in the model was it removed in those PowerQuery steps. And then, especially with custom columns, understanding what column was added can be very difficult, especially if you're having to scroll down a very large set of transformations. And this all takes time. And this is time that really the front-end customer or your client isn't really taking advantage of. They don't see this back-end work. They just want to see the reports and having accurate numbers and informative visuals. And so more time spent here means less time actually making the customer happy. So in order to set the stage for you to have a better semantic model and spend less time trying to understand the code, there's usually two practices that a lot of the teams that I work with take to heart. And I'm going to show a Power BI model here. This is a sample model. It's included in some of the templates I have here. It's pulling some data from a 538 website. Very simple Power BI semantic model. And if I open up PowerQuery, you can see over here, I've got a lot of different steps here for just building a date dimension. So when I'm working with teams and we're trying to make sure our semantic models are built for the future and a lot easier to update and understand, there's kind of two things we always work on. The first is adding comments to the steps. So if you were to crack open the advanced editor in your for the table and you hit advanced editor here, and let me just zoom in just to make sure for folks who aren't familiar with the Power Query. If you right click, there's an option for advanced editor. And if I click on that, you'll get a set of the steps here. That's what we call the Power Query M code. That is the behind the scenes code that runs all those applied steps. And each row that you see here is a step. And so if you wanted to add a comment to that step right before it, you can enter in and put in a comment. This is the first appearance and year column is removed. You can use the / asterisk and then the asterisk closing to put your comments together. And this is really helpful if you're trying to understand what's happening in the code, especially as you hit the done button. You'll notice up in the right here, there is now an information icon. And so when I hover over that information icon now, I can actually get a quick synopsis of what's happening. And so what I usually tell our development teams that I work with when we're doing commenting is try to keep it to about 25 to 50 characters. Don't write a dissertation unless you have to. And just give some context to what's happening. And so that way, instead of having to click on all these steps to kind of understand what's happening, you can just hover and move the mouse down. The next thing that we tell folks to do is take a look at just renaming the step. So in this case, I've added a column here, and the column is adding a date column. I could just right click on that step and rename that column. Say added date column. And now on top of that, with the comments and the applied steps there, I can have a better understanding when I'm opening up PowerQuery maybe for the first time, or I haven't looked at it for a couple months and I'm trying to reorient myself to what's happening with this data model. It's a lot easier to hover and take a look at the all applied steps when the name of the step is changed and there's a comment added to it. And so that is something that, from a practice perspective, really sets you up for success down the road, especially anytime you need to make updates to a semantic model. It's great to be able to go in, understand where you need to make those updates, plan for that, implement it, and get the updates to the customer quicker. If you're spending an hour trying to understand what's happening, that could be just too much time, or even a day trying to parse through all this code. I also know that if you're using sorts or you're using merges on those steps, if you're working with large data sets and you click on that step, the processing time takes a little time. You're slowing down the machine. You're trying to wait for that machine to finish to really understand what's going on. That's time. And if you're working on here and you're not working on new code, that's unproductive, at least in the data ops sense. All right, so now that you kind of have understand like what the challenge is and what the best practices for commenting are, let's talk a little bit about the problem here, commenting code. I know when I work on my PowerQuery files, I have to constantly remind myself to do those steps. And when you're in a hurry or you're trying to make some updates, commenting code is something that's is a difficult thing to continue to do and maintain, and do that across very large teams. Commenting code has been a struggle for a number of programming languages for a number of years, trying to get people to comment their code, comment your code. I can't tell you how many times as a junior developer working on JavaScript projects or C# projects, I get hey, make sure you comment your code during peer reviews. That seemed to come up every time. And so when Azure OpenAI came out, especially with some of the private or public preview of the ChatGPT 4 models, we started looking at is, can artificial intelligence help us comment this code? And maybe if ChatGPT, Azure OpenAI gives us the ability to take a look at the M code and then comment for us, maybe that can save some time, especially if I'm spending maybe a couple minutes to an hour having ChatGPT do the transformations versus, or the changes in the commenting versus paying somebody at an hourly rate. That's much cheaper to have Azure OpenAI do it than paying a developer to do all the changes to the data model, just to add comments. And so what I want to show you now is a implementation of that, and that's part of the template I'm sharing with you today. But before I get into the demo, there is some prerequisites that you're going to need in order to do that, and it's in the GitHub README file that I'll share with you. The first is you're going to need at least a premium per user or Fabric workspace, and the reason you're going to need that is we're going to have something connect to the prerequisites, and connect to the semantic model, and you need something called an XMLA connection. Fernando, I know you said that the link is not clickable, but near the end, I'm going to have the QR code you could take a picture of to download the PDF, which has the links that are working. So back to the first bullet, we need an XMLA connection because we really need to understand what M code exists in that data set. And once we can extract what the M code is in that data set, then we can look at the second prerequisite, which is Azure OpenAI. Azure OpenAI is a resource that you can create in your portal.azure.com or whatever sovereign tenant you have your Azure set up with. So today I'm going to be doing it in a commercial environment or commercial Azure, and show you a little bit of how to set up a ChatGPT model. There's instructions on the slide deck on Microsoft's instructions on doing that, but you need those two. You're going to need at least the premium per user capacity so we can leverage the XMLA connection. And then the second is you're going to need Azure OpenAI. All right, so the demo at a high level, what it's going to do is we're going to start out with a semantic model. And that semantic model is going to be parsed by a Power BI data flow. And it's going to use Azure OpenAI to get suggestions on what comments should be added to the PowerQuery code, as well as suggestions on what should be the name changes for the applied steps. And that's going to result in a report that I have here. And we'll do a more in-depth, maybe a more high-resolution demo here in a second. But the idea is you're going to get to see what the original code is in M, and then what the suggested code should be, whether you want additional comments or you want additional comments and changes to those applied steps. And then I'll show you how to take that and put it into your model. Now, as I go through this, the template and everything that I've covered today is in that link below. You can, once you download the PDF file, that link will take you to a GitHub page. The templates that I have there's a data flow version of it and a data set version of it. I'm going to show you the data flow version today, and there's a couple of reasons we want to do that. We're going to be storing the Azure OpenAI key in the data flow. It's a lot, I wouldn't say it's the most secure, but you can kind of lock down who has access to that data flow and connect to that data model. We can talk about the security aspects a little later in the lessons learned, but just suffice it to say, there's a version that works if you just have the data set. There's also a version that works in the data flow. All right, so first things first. I'm going to switch over my screen to portal.azure.com, and I've created an Azure OpenAI resource. And within Azure OpenAI, you can, down here, there is a model deployment screen. And this lets you create different versions of your large language models that you would like to deploy. So if you click on this button, it's going to take you to the Azure OpenAI Studio. And you can see here, I have a deployment created. And I'm going to show you, when you go to create a new deployment, you can select the model. And these models are going to be based on, and I have a link to the documentation here. There's versions of ChatGPT. There's also this Ada 002 that you can take advantage of. Over time, I know Microsoft has kind of promised that they're going to have new versions of this with new token limits. We'll go into that at some point. But the idea is you pick a model, you'll give the model a name, and then once it has a name, it becomes an API endpoint. And that API endpoint is very similar to like the ChatGPT, that it's its own entity where you can send an API request, give it a prompt, ask it to do something, and it will respond back. And so the whole point of deploying a model is to set up a REST API that you can call from PowerQuery to get this information when you're prompting. All right. So the next bit is I have the example of the data flow here. And let me crack open the data flow. And I'll try to zoom in a little bit here. Be a little too much. All right, so there's a couple parameters that we have set up here. The first, and is really important in the step, is we need to know how to connect to the semantic model in order to extract the M code so that we can understand what M code actually exists in that model. So if you think about what this data flow can do, is you could point it to any model you have in the service and extract the M code, and then get what the suggested comments and variable names are. And so from this demo's perspective, I've got it pointed to a URL for a workspace connection. And this is, again, why you need XMLA to do that. And the second parameter I have is the semantic model name, called sample model. The other parameters I have set up is the actual Azure OpenAI URL. So when I created that deployment, what it ended up doing is the name of the resource I created is the name here, .openai, and then the name of the deployment that I created as well is listed there. So for every deployment that you have in your own environment, this URL is going to be unique to the resource and the deployment name that you provided to work with ChatGPT. So this is the URL. And then I also have a key here. I'm not going to show you all that. I'm going to reset it after this presentation as well. But in order for you to communicate with the Azure OpenAI ChatGPT implementation in PowerQuery today, you need to provide it some sort of access key. And that access key gets sent over in the headers, which I'll show you what that looks like. But the idea is that's how you're going to let PowerQuery communicate to ChatGPT and Azure OpenAI. I'm hoping in the future, and I actually have a link to a Fabric idea, Microsoft really needs to do a little bit of better job of making sure that if we're making post requests or HTTP post requests to an API, we should have a more robust way of locking down those keys or giving us the ability to use managed identities. But for right now, for the simplicity of the demo, we're going to use an API URL with a key to communicate to Power BI. I'm sorry, to ChatGPT in Azure. All right, so I'm going to close the parameters here. And then we're going to take a look at the dynamic management view queries. So for those who are not familiar with this, in Power BI, and this is a carryover from SQL Server Analysis Services, you can actually get the metadata for your semantic model or your Power BI data set using what they call dynamic management view queries. And there's two queries that you can actually issue to the Power BI data set to get this information. The first is the calc dependencies, and this will give you all the dependencies on your DAX measures to your tables and the underlying M code that's used. So it's kind of the whole dependency tree that makes up the semantic model. So that's the first kind of dynamic management view query. We need to extract the M code from the semantic model that we're pointed to. The second is the discover M expressions. And so you may be wondering, well, why do you have to issue two queries to get the M code? At least from my understanding is in order to understand the M code that's sitting in the kind of the public part of the model, you need to use one of the queries in order to get the hidden M code that might be in like tables that aren't loaded, but they're still important for commenting. You have to use another query. And that's why in here we have like M expressions not loaded into the data set. It's going to call the dynamic management view to get that M code. And then we have another one that the dynamic management view query to get the visible code in the data set. And so if I click on here, you're going to notice I actually ran the ChatGPT against this data flow as well. And so all the steps here have been renamed using ChatGPT, as well as the comments were added. So if I go here and I'm pointing to this model, you're going to see there's two M expressions that get pulled back here. And the reason it's just two is if I look at the code here, what it's running is a dynamic management view query to get all the hidden M code. And then the M code that you would normally see that's producing the tables that you see in the semantic model that get loaded into the model are here. So the alignment dim, the date dim, the eye color dim, and then all the M code that's associated with it. And if this looks at all familiar, that's because I pointed it to a version of this data model just for demo purposes. So let me navigate back here. And so once this gets the dynamic management view queries, now this is the part where Azure OpenAI comes into play. And there's a couple functions that we have set up. The first is the function that's going to prompt Azure OpenAI. And I am going to open this up in the advanced editor, just so that you kind of have an understanding of what it's doing. And you can leverage this when you're working with your own ChatGPT implementation. It's going to take a prompt, and this prompt is going to ask ChatGPT something. And in order to ask ChatGPT something, we need to give it the URL, which is a parameter. We need to give it the API key. And then here are the headers we need to give it. We need to give it the content type, as well as pass in the API key. And then let me zoom out and come back in. We're going to build a JSON statement. We're going to send this JSON to the Azure OpenAI service, get the information or provide it to ChatGPT, and hopefully ChatGPT responds back accordingly. What we do is we actually provided the role of users. There's different roles in ChatGPT. The idea is that you can actually kind of preset ChatGPT to be the responder of the system, and you can give it a role of user. And this helps ChatGPT kind of understand the context in which it needs to respond to the prompts. And then in here, we just pass in the prompt. And then once we get the post request back, we're going to use a function called web.contents. It's a really powerful PowerQuery function that allows you to call APIs. It's going to issue that to the URL, give it the headers, give it the body, and then we're going to take that response and output it in the function. All right. Okay, so with that, we have kind of our base function to call the ChatGPT Azure OpenAI REST endpoint. The next two are just kind of wrappers for this function. We have the get comment and the get variable suggestion, and all we're passing into it is the prompt. There's really not a lot of differences in the code. I'll just show you real quickly. All it's doing is calling that function once you pass in the prompt. And then ChatGPT is going to send back kind of an array of responses. In our case, we're only getting one array in the responses. And we're just going to get the first response back from ChatGPT and output that. All right, so the next component is, okay, so what are we going to ask ChatGPT to do? In the template, we have two prompts. The first prompt is the one where I'm just asking it to give me what comment maybe I would need to insert on top of the applied step. And as you can see here, I've laid out a specific prompt, and what I've asked it to do is, consider what kind of context you're acting as. You're helping a PowerQuery developer. You're an assistant. And I'm going to give you some code, but before I give you the code, I want you to do these 4 steps. And from some of the lessons learned, and we'll go into that a little later, being very prescriptive on what you want ChatGPT to do, especially with ChatGPT 4, the better response and more structured response that you'll get out of it. So I've asked it to make sure it explains what the code's doing. Don't start the comment with the word step or number, because that's just repetitive. Don't copy the code, because I don't need a comment that's just a copy of the code. And then keep it to a certain set of characters. So instead of writing a 2-page comment, I just need it to be 225 characters. And then there's this little placeholder for the M code. And so what we're going to do is take that template and then just swap out where it has the M_code with each line of code in the PowerQuery or the mQuery file. We want to comment each line in the applied step. And then we have a similar prompt in the variable name suggestion. So changing the name of the applied step. What we're doing here is telling it to be very specific about, we want it to be in past tense, in the English language. We wanted to have spaces between the words. We wanted to have a maximum of 50 characters. We don't want it to be 125 and then we can't read what the applied step's doing. We need it to be very terse. And then last but not least, swapping out the M code to give it the actual specific M code in the prompt. All right, and then this is what we have for kind of the before, where we've combined all the M code that exist in that data model. And then we have what's been transformed. And so this is the code that is going to call ChatGPT. And let me open it up here because this might be a little easier. There is the code here that's actually going to make these calls to ChatGPT and take each line of the M code and pass in the different prompts. And so if we're expanding everything out here, let me go into this a little bit further and take a look at the M expression parse commenting. If I crack open the M code here, what you're going to see is each M expression, there is a function right here that gets called the FM get comment. And I'm going to pass each line of M code into that comment, into the prompt. Now, this can take some time when I'm running through these steps to show you on the screen. We might wait a couple seconds to see if it renders. If it's the first time you're ever working with this, we parameterize it where there's an isDev flag. This helps you maybe just kind of work with just 1 or 2 lines of your table M code as opposed to all of them. Also keep in mind that every time you're making a call to ChatGPT, that's a cost. So that having an isDev or parameterizing it can make sure instead of making 1,000 calls to ChatGPT, you're making maybe 10 that you want to test out. It's always good to have a parameter flag in. So when it's running these M expressions, it's going to come back, and then what this template does is replace or offers a replacement code for the model. And when that expands or is put together, it comes out as 2 tables. The before, so this is going to be your before, and then this is going to be your after. And when you combine that all together, I've got a template that you connect to the output of the data set. And so what I've done is I've switched over to the Power BI report template that connects to that data flow. And you're going to see on the left here, I've got the tables that are from that sample model. On the left-hand side here, I've got the original PowerQuery code. And on the right-hand side, I have what the additional comments are. And then if you look here, there's no changes to the variable names, just a line of comment code right above each step. And then you can also toggle, and we're using the field parameters to let us do that. You can toggle, and you'll notice that instead of saying source, now it says loaded Marvel data source or selected aligned column. And so this is actually changing the steps in the M code. And so if you wanted to maybe take a look at the output here and say, oh, okay, this looks pretty good. Maybe I want to move it into my data model and make some changes. All you have to do is right click, copy the value, and I'll do that one more time. So I'm hovering over the additional comments and variable name changes. I'm going to right click, hit copy value. I go to my data model here and I have the alignment dim. I'm going to duplicate the table, right click, go to advanced editor, and do a select all, just paste. And hopefully the demo gods are nice to me. Yep. And then you'll see on the right-hand side, the M code's been changed. And if I toggle in between the two, you'll notice that the data didn't change, but the right-hand side here now in the data model has the change in the applied steps as well as the comments as well in it. And thanks to ChatGPT, I can kind of take these models, point it to the semantic model using dynamic management views or DMVs, tell ChatGPT to go comment it, and then I can piece by piece, at least for this demo, replace the M code with a better commented format. Now, there's always a way that you can take a step further and automate those next steps of that copy and paste. But for the purpose of the demo, I wanted to show just the prompting and how you can kind of manually change those, the M code that you have in your models. All right, so I'm going to go back to the report here. I know we've got about 20 more minutes, and I want to give a little time for questions. As I was working with the ChatGPT model, there was a couple lessons learned that I had with this. One of them is learn a little bit about prompt engineering, and so in the slide deck, I took advantage of a free OpenAI or deeplearning.ai training session that does prompt engineering for developers. It's about an hour, but it teaches you some of the ways to interact with ChatGPT. If you're unfamiliar with it, you're really trying to get to know it. I almost feel like if you were around before Google or search engines started, and you started getting into working with search engines, it's very similar as kind of understanding, how do I write my search query? Well, in this is very similar in the sense that, how am I going to communicate with ChatGPT? And the two folks who do this training session do a really nice job in kind of teaching you the different techniques and ways to get the response you want out of ChatGPT. So I highly suggest taking this free training. It was very helpful for me and helped me structure my prompts to be a little more efficient in getting the responses I need. And so those included setting the premise of what you want ChatGPT to do. So letting it know you're going to be an assistant and here's the goal. Giving it some sort of indicator to bind or bound code, or the part that you want ChatGPT to focus on. And then setting boundaries, telling it, keep it to a certain amount, make sure you don't do this, and being very prescriptive in the format in which you're presenting that to ChatGPT. Those are some things I learned after going through this training, and I really recommend, if you're getting into prompt engineering or working with Azure OpenAI and ChatGPT, that's a great free way within an hour get a better understanding of how to communicate with ChatGPT. The next lessons learned was the concept of token limits. Now, and if you're looking at the data template I have, what you're going to see is I actually extract each line of code and then send that to ChatGPT. So it's just one line, very small amount of characters. At first, I tried working with it and sending it like the whole M code, and tried doing it with some very large data transformations. Well, the problem you run into with the ChatGPT API is you have this thing called a token limit. And ChatGPT has an upper bound, depending on what implementation it is, on the number of tokens that can come across in the prompt and the response. And so the prompt and the response together cannot exceed the limit. And for example, if it's 8,000 for your token limit, if you're adding in M code or just a large piece of text, regardless, with that prompt, you can, take up a huge portion of those tokens. If you're expecting it to add a bunch of verbose comments and expand the variable name, that's going to expand the number of tokens that comes back. And so there was a couple models that I had worked with that were hitting that limit. And that limit is defined, I'm going to switch back to the browser here, by Microsoft's documentation. And so at the time I was working with the 8,000 character limit. I wasn't hitting it all the time, but for some M code that I had very large tables with a lot of transformations, I definitely was hitting that. And so there's some techniques that are out there to work with tokens strategy and how you break up your prompts to stay under the token, but still try to maintain the context in which you're working with ChatGPT. And then there's a wonderful strategies. There's a gentleman, Greg, and I don't want to butcher his last name, has a YouTube video that goes over the several different strategies on breaking up your prompts and breaking up your text or your code to interact with ChatGPT. And depending on how or what you're trying to get out of ChatGPT, you can pick one of those models. And so I did a separation method where I take each line of the applied step, send that to ChatGPT and get it. I don't lose a lot of context, so that worked well for me. For some folks, let's say you wanted it to summarize a huge document, you may have to break up that document into parts and then take the summaries of the summaries and get it down so that you stay underneath the token limits. And so there's different strategies. This was a video, it's a little over an hour, but if you're really getting into prompt engineering and you're coming up against token limits, this is a wonderful video to watch. All right, last but not least, I know a lot of folks ask about security here. Microsoft has a whole list of security considerations when using the Azure OpenAI service on how they're not using your data for training, how it doesn't go outside to the commercial sector outside of your tenant. There's a lot of things to consider when using Azure OpenAI service. The reason that we decided for some of the projects we're working with Azure OpenAI was the fact that we didn't want that M code getting used anywhere outside, and Microsoft gives you that level of, I would say, comfort, or at least they're very upfront on how they're going to use the data with the Azure OpenAI service. Also, the demo I gave you today, the keys that I showed you that's used to send the API key to the ChatGPT is something that needs to be protected. And in the link that I have here is there's a person out there that has a Fabric idea. It was a Power BI idea for a while. There needs to be an easier way to protect that when we're sending post requests. Right now we're using ChatGPT in a sense to comment our PowerQuery code. We may be wanting to do other aspects of prompt engineering with ChatGPT and our Power BI model, get some sort of summary back. And if we're sharing those models, those keys need to be protected. And Microsoft needs to do a better job or have an idea to lock that down in a post request. Currently, the web.contents function, if you send a post request to, or you're using a post request, you have to send an anonymous connection. It can't be backed by OAuth or Windows authentication or organizational account. So please vote that up. I think one of the things that it's the path of least resistance. So if you're not smart about protecting the key, people will take advantage of that. And if you can send post requests and use a key, they're gonna take advantage of it. Microsoft needs to give a good off ramp to make that more secure. And then if you're looking at this going, all right, well, why doesn't Microsoft offer a capability to just right click and say, hey, can you comment my code for me? There's a Fabric idea out there to leverage that. Obviously, there's probably some cost associated with it, but if you're interested in doing that, instead of going through the process of setting up the template and doing the PowerQuery commenting, this is an idea that you could vote up, and hopefully Microsoft eventually at some point starts to take advantage of or take a look at this idea, implement that, and make it a lot easier to comment your code and rename your variables and give you a little more context as you're working with PowerQuery. So with that, I'm almost at the 10-minute mark. So the slides for today, you can download here with the links. And yeah, I'll open it up to any questions.
Well, thank you. That was amazing. It was really, really good. I was like, okay, well, I've seen some presentations, but this really went all the way. And I really appreciate the detail on all the steps that you showed. And now I feel like, yeah, maybe I could give it a try. So you give us also the tools and how to get started. And indeed, it's something that has a cost, but there is also a cost in not commenting. And there's also a cost in commenting manually. So you need to put all side by side and see which one works best in each case. I would, would encourage people to I don't know if we can. I don't know if people can turn on the mics or the cameras. I would like you to see. I mean, there's so many people here. I'm really proud of the team that really came to see you. Of course, you're a big name, so I'm surprised up to a certain level.
You're too
only.
kind. You're too
Yeah.
kind. I did see Fernando ask, could we use Key Vault with Azure OpenAI to protect the keys? Yes. And I would say, especially if you think about using Fabric, you could implement a very similar implementation in a notebook. And there's a lot easier way to go to Key Vault in a notebook and get the permission to get that API key. It's still a little difficult with PowerQuery to go to Key Vault and get the key. And I'm not aware of a connector that makes that still easier. It honestly, it would be nice if you had a workspace and your workspace could act as an app service principal and then make a request and act as a managed identity. It would make it a little easier to maybe work with these keys and secure them appropriately. And I think he also asked the question, how much did you pay for this commenting? Actually, not a lot. When I went through the development phase of this using just the sample model, I think I paid at most $15 just to get like the templates and everything built. And then I would only pay like maybe $1 against the model. It really didn't cost me that much to actually run the comment. And you think about how much you spend an hour for a developer to do all that stuff themselves. A couple dollars isn't all that much. For US dollars, that I'm putting that in.
So actually, even if you work as a consultant, it would make sense to pay yourself for that. Exactly. I would say, right, because then you produce better work and it also helps you bring more value. So it actually pays itself, I would say. Yeah, because sometimes this gets complicated if you say, for developing these, I will need these to do the comments. It's like, no, we're not paying for this kind of thing. This is, I would say that this is probably the answer you'll get in most cases, just for the trouble that it brings to them. But if you have it on your own, it would be okay then if you are in the customer's tenant, but it's okay, right? You can call your REST API all the same, right?
You could obviously you'd want to talk to your customer about because that data is going to their codes, not their data.
Just the code. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so if they're worried that the M code is somehow proprietary, that's a concern. But there's nothing that says like, hey, why don't you create your own Azure OpenAI in the tenant, and then you've got it locked down, and none of that's leaving your tenant.
Yeah, if you don't want that, then pay for the resource. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. You can move the cost on to them to pay for the commenting.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that it's hard to bring on the table and give priority to, but at the same time, it's one of the things that makes most sense, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times like you'll inherit, and I know like the folks like Guy in a Cube call them the ugly babies, and you get them, and you're just kind of going through the M code, and you just. The worst thing is you see like add custom column 15 and you're like, all right, this is going to take a little while to.
I know. But there is a thing though, and it's all these comments, of course, they're going to tell you the what. So what is this step doing? Yeah. But then there's another question like, why is it?
Why are we doing this?
This is something else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't been, I haven't tried doing the prompt to see if it would understand the why. That would be interesting. I would think you'd have to give it some sort of rules to tell it why. I also, in one of the vote ideas, I think it would be really helpful. And I know there's some third-party products that do this, but just having a general find function in applied steps, like if the comments are there, you can at least do a Control F and get that information, or at least like narrow it down very quickly.
Nice. Yeah, I think we have some questions. Could you please elaborate on the last idea you showed? Copilot is already available to comment M code in the semantic model. I saw Alex Powers showing a demo a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, so Copilot is getting to the point where it's probably going to offer that capability. That's still in preview. I know I've talked to Alex before, So that idea, I'm hoping, becomes the reality and becomes part of the product. A lot of what I'm showing today was just to give you an introduction of how, even before Copilot, we were trying to take advantage of doing commenting. My hope is, like, you shouldn't have to go to this extent to like set it up. It's helpful to understand it because there might be a reason to use ChatGPT for other contexts in PowerQuery to take advantage. Copilot for PowerQuery hopefully is going to help solve that issue, in which then you're just paying the license cost to do it for you. And anything that can simplify that would be much better. And we've had this idea out there for a little bit to try to push that so that it does end up in Copilot as a formal product, and hopefully at a cost point that folks would be happy with.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, that would be one of the first use cases I would try to bring into Copilot. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, Fernando's happy about the session, as most of the people, I guess they are. There is also a question from Nelson Lopez. It said that there's this info.expressions. Is that something that we could leverage instead of the DMVs as well?
Yes, actually. So that's in preview. That came out in December. I've been really excited about that. This should, once it becomes kind of generally available, you should be able to get a lot of that information out of the info.expressions functions versus actually having to call the DMVs. The DMVs aren't going to go away just because they've been part of the core product for a number of years, and a lot of products rely on that. But the info expressions are really, really cool, and I'm really excited about it. Been working on doing schema testing with info.expressions, because now you can actually write DAX-based tests to actually check the schema of your semantic model and see if it's changed for the worse. Like if somebody changes a column from a text to a number and you're expecting it to be a text, you can at least know that that's happening, or they break a relationship. Yeah. So info.expressions, I'm really excited about where that's going. Plus, if you couple that with the DAX query view, it really, really powerful capabilities that it's come into the product.
I see. Very, very good. Any more questions? Si hay alguna pregunta en español, también puedo hacer de la traducción si es necesario. Yeah. Well, that was an experiment. We were trying, I don't know, I hope to get some feedback on how the translation, live translation went on Google Meet. Hopefully people got some grasp of what you explained. Yeah, in future versions, I'll try to record both. Today I was like, I don't know, I had some problems to log in, and so maybe we could even like publish the presentation with the live translation so that people from the Spanish will actually get to know, yeah, I mean, all this knowledge, because otherwise it really, there's a barrier, and there's only like Spanish speakers can bring that value. But of course, it's much faster if we can just kind of translate what you have. Yeah. Another video, it happens. Oh, yeah, there is.
Oh, I haven't seen the video. I'm going to have to look at that one. I read a couple of blog articles to try to like get up to speed on calling the non-Azure OpenAI ChatGPT through PowerQuery and PowerShell. But I'll have to take a look at Wynn's video.
Yeah, Wynn does great videos. All right, so I think we can wrap it here. And I want to thank you once again for coming. And it was really, really awesome. And I hope that, we can do that again some other time.
Definitely. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming. Muchas gracias a todos por venir. Espero que habéis disfrutado. Y nada, vamos a intentar mantener esas presentaciones una al mes durante este año, a ver qué tal va la cosa, ¿de acuerdo? Yeah, we're going to try to keep once a month these sort of presentations, and hopefully, so to level up the game of User Group Barcelona. Eh? All right. Okay. I think, yeah, I'll stop the recording and yeah, we'll upload it soon in our YouTube channel. Vamos a poner la presentación en inglés en YouTube, ¿de acuerdo?